Captain Lee sat in his command chair watching the stars through the big window of his ship. The UES Defiance was a good ship, strong and fast. Lee had been captain for 5 years now. He liked the quiet of deep space, far from Earth and the busy trade routes. "Captain," said Officer Park from her station, "I'm getting a strange signal. It's not from any ship I know." Lee turned to look at her. Park was the best communications officer in the fleet. If she said something was strange, it was worth listening to. "Put it on the main screen," he said. The signal was weak and broken. It sounded like crying mixed with music. The sound made Lee feel sad, even though he didn't know what it meant. "Can you clean it up?" he asked. Park worked at her controls for a few minutes. Slowly, the signal became clearer. It was definitely a distress call, but in a language no human had ever heard before. The voice was beautiful, but filled with pain. "Set course for the signal," Lee ordered, "and wake up the whole crew. We might have first contact here." The Defiance moved through space toward the signal. It took 3 hours to reach the source. When they did, Lee couldn't believe what he saw. A ship floated in space, but it looked like it was made of crystal. It was beautiful, catching the light from a nearby star and throwing rainbows everywhere. But the ship was badly damaged. Parts of it were broken off and floating around it like glittering dust. "Life signs?" Lee asked. "Yes, sir," said Park. "Weak, but there are definitely living beings on that ship." Lee made his decision quickly. "Prepare the rescue shuttles. Dr. Kim, get your medical team ready. We're going to help them." Dr. Kim was the chief medical officer. She was small but tough, and she never gave up on a patient. "Captain, we don't know anything about their biology. I might not be able to help them." "We'll figure it out," Lee said. "We can't just leave them here to die." The rescue took 6 hours. The crystal ship was fragile, and they had to be very careful not to damage it more. When they finally brought the survivors aboard the Defiance, everyone stopped and stared. The aliens were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked like living crystal. They moved slowly, and when they spoke, their voices sounded like singing. There were 12 of them, including what looked like children. The oldest one stepped forward. His crystal skin was a deep blue color, and his eyes glowed softly. When he spoke, the ship's computer tried to translate his words. "I am Threndi. We are the Villani. Our home is gone." Dr. Kim stepped forward with her hands empty to show she meant no harm. "I'm Dr. Kim. We want to help you. Are you hurt?" Threndi looked at her with surprise. In the 300 years the Villani had known other space-traveling species, none had ever offered help to strangers. Most demanded payment first, or simply ignored distress calls that weren't from their own kind. "You want to help? But you don't know us. We have nothing to give you in return." Captain Lee came forward too. "We help because it's the right thing to do. That's what humans do." Over the next few days, the story came out. The Villani had lived on a beautiful world covered in crystal forests. They were peaceful, spending their time making music and art with their crystal technology. Then the raiders came. The raiders were from many different species, united only by their greed. They wanted the Villani's crystal technology for weapons. When the Villani refused to give it to them, the raiders destroyed their entire world. The 12. Villani on the crystal ship were all that remained of their people. Dr. Kim worked day and night to understand Villani biology. She learned that they got energy from light, like plants. She set up special lamps for them in the medical bay. Officer Park learned their language and helped translate. But it was Engineer Cho who made the biggest discovery: the Volani crystal. Technology wasn't just pretty. It was incredibly advanced. Their crystals could store massive amounts of energy and make computers work 100 times faster. "Captain," Cho said excitedly, "if we combined their crystal tech with our ships, we could travel twice as fast and use half the fuel." But Lee wasn't thinking about technology. He was thinking about the Volani children who hadn't spoken since. Coming aboard, they just sat together, their crystal skin dim with sadness. "They need a new home," he said. When the Defiance reached the nearest human colony, Commander Han was waiting. Han was in charge of the Outer Rim colonies, and she was, known for making tough decisions quickly. "Captain Lee," she said over the communication screen, "I've read your report. You want us to give these aliens a new home?" "Yes, ma'am. They have nowhere else to go." Han was quiet for a moment. "The Galactic Council has rules about refugees. Most species don't want to take care of strangers." "We're not most species," Lee said. Han smiled. "No, we're not. Bring them down to the planet. We'll find room." The colony world was called New California. It had wide-open spaces and lots of sunlight. When the Volani saw it, their crystal skin began to glow brighter than it had since the rescue. "This could be home?" asked Threndy, hardly daring to hope. "This is home," said Commander Han firmly. The integration wasn't easy. The Volani needed special buildings that let in more light. They had different customs and ways of doing things. But the human colonists worked hard to make them feel welcome. Farmer Na showed the Volani how to grow earth crops. The Volani showed her how their crystal gardens could purify water and air. Scientist Bay worked with Volani researchers to understand their technology better. Within 6 months, the colony was thriving like never before. Human Volani teams were making discoveries that neither species could have made alone. The crystal gardens made the air cleaner, and the new hybrid crops grew, bigger and healthier. But success brought attention. Other species in the galaxy began to notice what was happening on New California. Some were curious, others were worried, and some were angry. The hegemony was a group of 4 military species that controlled a large part of the galaxy. They didn't like change, and they especially didn't like humans becoming more powerful. Their representative, a large reptilian creature named Krextal, came to Earth to speak with the human government. "Your partnership with the Crystal Singers is dangerous," Krextal told Ambassador Yoon. "Their technology could upset the balance of power in the galaxy. You must end this relationship." Ambassador Yoon was an old woman who had been dealing with aliens for 20 years. She looked at Krextal calmly. "The Volani are our friends. We don't abandon our friends." "This is a warning," Krextal said, his voice full of threat. "There will be consequences if you continue." "Then there will be consequences," Yoon replied. "But our answer remains the same. We don't abandon friends." 6 months after Krextal's warning, the harassment began. It started small at first. Hegemony ships would stop human cargo vessels carrying Volani crystals. They would demand inspections that took days instead of hours. The inspections always found nothing wrong, but the delays cost money and time. Captain Park was commanding a cargo ship called the Seoul Express when 3 hegemony warships surrounded her. The lead ship was twice the size of her cargo vessel, with heavy weapons pointed at her hull. "This is Commander Vorth of the Hegemony Enforcement Division," came the cold voice over the radio. Prepare for mandatory inspection. Park had been through this 5 times in the past month. She knew the routine. Permission granted. But I need to remind you that my cargo is time-sensitive medical supplies. All cargo will be inspected thoroughly, Vorth replied. This may take several days. The inspection teams came aboard wearing full combat armor as if they expected a fight. They tore through the cargo hold, scanning every box and container. They found medical equipment, Volani light therapy devices for human hospitals, and crystal components for communication systems. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. But they took their time anyway. Dr. Kim was waiting for those medical supplies on New California. 3 Volani children were sick with a condition that only the new hybrid technology could cure. Every hour the Seoul Express was delayed meant those children suffered more. Please, Park radioed to Commander Vorth. The medical supplies are clearly marked. People are dying. Hegemony security comes first, Vorth replied without emotion. It took 4 days for the inspection to finish. When Park finally reached New California, one of the Volani children had died. The other 2 survived, but barely. This scene played out across human space. Trade ships were delayed, passengers were questioned, and cargo was seized for further investigation, only to be returned weeks later, often damaged. Admiral Song was the head of Human Fleet Command. She was a tough woman who had fought in 3 wars, but she had never been so frustrated. Her ships were built for fighting, not for babysitting cargo vessels. We need more patrols, she told President Lim during their weekly security meeting. The hegemony is testing us, seeing how far they can push. President Lim was a calm man who preferred diplomacy to war, but even his patience was wearing thin. What about the Galactic Council? Surely they can see what's happening. The Council is scared, said Ambassador Yoon, who had joined the meeting, from the capital on Earth. Half the species are afraid of the hegemony. The other half don't want to get involved in someone else's problem. The Galactic Council met every month on the neutral space station called Unity Point. It was a massive structure that could hold representatives from all 43 member species. Ambassador Yoon attended every meeting, but she felt like she was talking to a wall. The hegemony's actions are clear violations of free trade agreements, she argued during one session. They're using their military to intimidate civilian ships. Chancellor Rixon of the hegemony stood to respond. He was the leader of the 4-Species Alliance, a being that looked like a cross between an insect and a reptile. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The hegemony has the right to ensure galactic security, he said. The rapid spread of crystal singer technology raises legitimate concerns about weapons proliferation. The Volani. Crystals are used for medical equipment and communication systems, Yoon protested. Not weapons. Any technology can become a weapon in the wrong hands, Rixon replied smoothly. Humanity's history shows this quite clearly. Yoon felt her anger rising, but she kept her voice steady. Humanity has followed all galactic laws. Regarding technology sharing, we've been transparent about our research. Transparency is not enough, Rixon said. The hegemony demands that humanity cease all cooperation with the Crystal Singers immediately. You have 30 standard days to comply. The council chamber fell silent. An ultimatum like this hadn't been issued in over 50 years. The last time it happened, it led to a war that destroyed 2 entire species. And if we refuse, Yoon asked quietly, then the hegemony will take corrective action to protect galactic security. Back on New California, the news of the ultimatum spread quickly. Colonel Juan was the military commander of the colony. He had been a soldier for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like the reaction of his people. Human colonists began volunteering for militia duty. Farmers put down their tools and picked up weapons, even teenagers too young to join the way. Military begged to help defend the colony. But it was the Villani reaction that moved him most. Elder Threndi came to Juan's office with tears in his crystal eyes. "Colonel, we cannot ask humanity to risk war for our sake. My people will leave. We will find somewhere else to go." One looked at the elderly alien who had become like a grandfather to many human children in the colony. "Where would you go, Threndi? You said yourself that we're the only species that offered you help. We will manage somehow, but we cannot be the cause of your destruction." One stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see human and Villani children playing together in the crystal gardens. Human workers were building new homes for Villani refugees who had been found on other worlds. Villani healers were working in the human hospital, saving lives with their light therapy. "You're not the cause of anything," Juan said finally. "The hegemony is choosing to threaten us. We're choosing to stand by our friends." The message from the colony reached Earth within hours. Every human settlement in the galaxy sent the same response. From the biggest cities to the smallest mining stations, from military bases to research outposts, the answer was the same. Nobody threatened their friends. Intelligence Officer Kang worked in a secret facility deep under the mountains of Korea. Her job was to gather information about potential threats to humanity. What she discovered about the hegemony made her blood run cold. The ultimatum wasn't really about the Villani or their technology. Kang had intercepted hegemony military communications that revealed their true plan. They saw humanity as the real threat. Humans were too unpredictable. They made friends with species that others ignored. They shared technology freely instead of hoarding it. They put principles before profit. Worst of all, they were getting stronger. The hegemony's plan was simple. Use the Villani situation as an excuse to attack humanity. Make it look like humans were the aggressors who wouldn't follow galactic law. Once humanity was defeated, the hegemony would control human technology and use it to dominate the galaxy completely. Kang sent her report directly to President Lim. When he read it, his face went pale. "They're going to attack us, no matter what we do," he said to his advisors. "Even if we abandoned the Villani, they'd find another excuse." Defense Minister An nodded grimly. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Lim looked around the room at his cabinet. These men and women had guided humanity through 30 years of galactic politics. They had always chosen diplomacy first, violence only as a last resort. "We prepare for war," Lim said quietly, "and we make sure the galaxy knows why we're fighting." On Day 28 of the ultimatum, Ambassador Bay stood before the Galactic Council one last time. The chamber was packed. Every species had sent representatives to witness what many believed would be humanity's surrender. Bay was young for an ambassador, but she had spent her entire career studying galactic law and politics. She knew that what she said next would determine the future of her species. "Honorable representatives," she began, "humanity has considered the hegemony's ultimatum carefully. We have consulted with our allies, reviewed galactic law, and examined our own consciences." The chamber was completely silent. The Villani came to us as refugees, asking for nothing but the chance to survive. We offered them friendship, because that is what we do. We will not abandon them now because someone threatens us. Our answer is no. Chancellor Ricksan's insect-like face showed no emotion. Then you choose war. No, Bay replied firmly. You choose war. We choose to defend our friends. There's a difference. As she left the chamber, Bay knew that humanity's real test was just beginning. The hegemony had 4 species, millions of ships, and no conscience. But they had underestimated one thing about humans. When humans said they didn't abandon friends, they meant it absolutely. On day 29 of the ultimatum, the attack came without warning. Captain CO was drinking coffee in her ready room aboard the Soul's Pride when the alarms started screaming. She ran to the bridge just as her tactical officer shouted the words every captain feared: hegemony fleet dropping out of hyperspace, 60 ships, all combat vessels. SEO looked at the main screen and felt her heart sink. The enemy fleet was massive, led by a dreadnought 3 times the size of her heavy cruiser. She had 8 human ships in the system. The math was simple and brutal. Send immediate distress signal to Fleet Command, she ordered. All civilian ships, emergency evacuation to the planet's surface, military vessels, form defensive line. War Commander Thok Ryan commanded the hegemony fleet from his flagship, the Dominator. He had fought in dozens of campaigns and conquered 15 worlds. This should be easy. Humans were tough fighters, but they were badly outnumbered. Open communications to all human vessels, he commanded. Let them hear the terms. CEO's communication officer patched through the incoming signal. Thokrian's voice filled the bridge, cold and mechanical, through the translator. Human vessels, this is War Commander Thokrian. You are ordered to surrender immediately and prepare for planetary occupation. All Crystal Singer aliens will be transferred to hegemony custody. Resistance will be met with total destruction. SEO looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. These men and women had served with her for 3 years. They had families on the planet below. They knew they were about to die. Signal back. To the hegemony fleet, she said clearly. This is Captain CO of the UES Soul's Pride. We respectfully decline your offer. Come and take them. The battle began instantly. Hegemony ships opened fire with everything they had, trying to end the fight quickly. But the human ships didn't stay still and get destroyed. They moved like angry hornets, using their speed and maneuverability to strike and run. Captain CO pushed her ship straight at the enemy flagship. Her weapons couldn't penetrate its heavy armor, but she had one advantage. The hegemony commander didn't expect anyone to be crazy enough to ram a dreadnought. All crew to escape pods, she ordered as her ship accelerated toward the Dominator. I'm going to give them something to remember us by. Captain, her first officer protested, you don't have to do this. CO smiled sadly. Yes, I do. Those people down there are counting on us. Get to the pods. The Soul's Pride struck the Dominator's shield generators at full speed. The explosion lit up space like a small sun. CO's ship was completely destroyed, but the massive flagship's shields failed. For the first time in the battle, the hegemony flagship was vulnerable. Captain Lee, now commanding the New California orbital defense platforms, didn't waste the opportunity. Every weapon he had targeted the exposed dreadnought. Missiles and energy beams tore into its hull, causing massive damage, but it wasn't enough. The hegemony had too many ships. One by one, the human vessels were destroyed or disabled. Within 4 hours, the space battle was over. War Commander Thokrian was furious. The humans had damaged his flagship and destroyed 3 of his cruisers. This was supposed to be a simple intimidation mission, not a real fight. Begin orbital bombardment, he ordered. Target the Crystal Singer settlements first. Make sure the humans see what happens to those they try to protect. Ground Commander. O watched from the Planetary Command Center as the first bombs fell from space. She had been a soldier for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. The hegemony wasn't targeting military bases or government buildings. They were targeting hospitals, schools, and refugee centers. "Sir," her communications officer said with a shaking voice, "the Volani settlement at Crystal Valley is under direct attack. They're bombing the civilian shelters." O felt sick. Crystal Valley was where most of the Volani children lived. There were no weapons there, no military value at all. It was pure terror bombing. "All available forces to Crystal Valley," she ordered. "Air support, ground troops, everything we have." But it was too late for most of them. The first wave of bombs had been specially designed to shatter crystal structures. The beautiful crystal gardens that the Volani had built were turned into deadly fragments. Families that had survived the destruction of their homeworld died together in the ruins of their new one. Elder Threndi was found in the wreckage of a school, his body covering 3 small Volani children. He had saved them with his life, but hundreds of others were not so lucky. The images reached Earth within 6 hours. Every human on every world saw the footage. Volani children crying over their parents. Crystal homes turned into glass graves. Peaceful refugees murdered for the crime of accepting human friendship. Major Jiang was in his office at military headquarters when the videos came in. He was a tough man who had seen combat many times. But when he watched a Volani child trying to wake up her dead mother, he broke down and cried. Captain Ryu was commanding a patrol ship near the outer rim when she received the transmission. Her crew gathered around the main screen in stunned silence as they watched the crystal gardens burning. These were the same gardens they had visited just months before, full of beauty and hope. The reaction across human space was immediate and absolute. Every political party, every corporation, every military unit, every citizen spoke with the same voice. The hegemony had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. President Lim called an emergency session of the Global Council. Representatives from every human nation gathered in the Great Assembly Hall in Geneva. The debate lasted exactly 10 minutes. "The hegemony has murdered innocent children," Lim said simply. "They did it to send us a message. Now we will send them one." The vote was unanimous. Every nation, every faction, every political group that had disagreed about everything else for centuries agreed on this. War was declared not just by the human government, but by every human settlement in the galaxy. But this wasn't just about war. This was about justice. Fleet Admiral Moon was the supreme commander of all human military forces. She was a small woman, with gray hair and kind eyes, but she had the respect of every soldier in the fleet. When she addressed the military leaders, her voice was calm but deadly. "The hegemony wants to teach us about consequences," she said. "They're about to learn what real consequences look like." The mobilization was the largest in human history. Every ship that could fly was armed and prepared for combat. Reserves were called up from across the galaxy. Even civilian vessels were converted into warships. But it was the change in the humans themselves that was most frightening. The species that had always tried diplomacy first, that had shown mercy to defeated enemies, that had built hospitals instead of weapons factories, had become something else. They had become the avenging angels of the galaxy. On New California, the survivors worked frantically to treat the wounded. Dr. Kim moved from patient to patient, trying to save lives with the few medical supplies that hadn't been destroyed. She worked for 36 hours straight before collapsing from exhaustion. Colonel Wan coordinated the rescue efforts, but his mind was already on revenge. Every Villani body they pulled from the rubble made him more determined. The hegemony had wanted to break human spirit by attacking the innocent. They had done the opposite. Lieutenant Na was a communications officer who had become friends with many Villani over the past months. She had learned their language and their customs. She had played with their children and listened to their stories. Now she was sending messages to every human ship in the galaxy. The messages were simple: pictures of the dead, videos of the destruction, and one sentence that became the rallying cry of the human fleet: they killed children. Across the galaxy, other species watched the human response with growing alarm. The Galactic Council met in emergency session, but they couldn't agree on what to do. Some condemned the hegemony's attack on civilians. Others worried about human retaliation, but none of them understood what they were really seeing. Humanity wasn't preparing for war. They were preparing for something much worse. They were preparing to remake the galaxy to ensure this could never happen again. The hegemony had sent their message loud and clear. They could hurt anyone, anywhere, and there would be no consequences. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. War Commander Thokrian received reports of human military buildup with satisfaction. Let them come, he thought. His forces controlled dozens of systems and thousands of worlds. Humanity had perhaps 200 warships. The math was still on his side. He had no idea that humanity wasn't interested in math anymore. They were interested in justice. And justice, as the hegemony was about to learn, was not a numbers game. It was about determination, sacrifice, and the willingness to go further than anyone thought possible. The hegemony had been cautioned once. Now they would face the consequences of ignoring that caution, and those consequences would be absolute. 3 weeks after the massacre at New California, the human fleet arrived at the hegemony border worlds. What they brought wasn't war in any traditional sense. It was systematic annihilation. War Commander Thokrian expected the humans to attack his military bases first. That's what every logical species would do. Take out the defenses, then negotiate surrender terms. He had positioned his strongest forces at key strategic points, ready for conventional warfare. Instead, humanity ignored his military entirely. The guest's first target was Kex Prime, the hegemony's main communication hub. Admiral Moon's task force didn't bombard the planet or demand surrender. They simply appeared in the system and began broadcasting on every frequency. The message was the same footage from New California. Villani children dying in the rubble. Crystal gardens turned to glass graves. Elder Threndy's body covering the younglings he had tried to save. "This is Admiral Moon of the human fleet," her voice accompanied the images. "The beings you see dying were refugees. They harmed no one. They threatened no one. The hegemony murdered them to send humanity a message. Now we send our reply. The deed that broadcast continued for 6 hours. Every being in the hegemony territories saw the images. They watched the crystal homes shatter. They heard the crying of wounded children. They saw what their leaders had done in their name. Then the humans did something unprecedented. They left. They didn't attack the planet. They didn't demand surrender. They just vanished back into hyperspace, leaving the population to contemplate what they had witnessed. War Commander Thokrian was confused and angry. What kind of military tactic is this? They show pictures and leave? His intelligence officer, a nervous creature named Skex, tried to explain. Sir, the psychological impact on our civilian population has been significant. There have been protests on 17 worlds. Protests? Thokrian roared. We are at war! Arrest the protesters! But the protests weren't stopping. Across hegemony, space, ordinary citizens were asking uncomfortable questions. Why had they attacked refugees? Why murder children? What had the Villani done to deserve death? The questions became more troubling when the humans' next move became clear. Captain Jung commanded the stealth ship Invisible Wind. His mission was simple but deadly: infiltrate hegemony space and destroy their infrastructure, not their military infrastructure. Their civilian infrastructure. Jung and his Special Forces team had spent 2 years learning hegemony technology. They knew how their power grids worked, how their food distribution systems operated, how their communication networks functioned. Now they used that knowledge like a surgeon's knife. On Zextar 4, the main food processing plant simply stopped working. No explosions, no obvious sabotage. The machines just wouldn't start. Millions of people faced hunger within days. On Hive World Beta, the planetary power grid developed mysterious failures. Lights went out in government buildings. Military computers crashed. Life support systems in the capital city began shutting down randomly. The hegemony military tried to respond, but they couldn't find the saboteurs. Jung's team moved like ghosts, striking and disappearing before anyone knew they were there. But the most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Cyber warfare specialist Shin sat in a bunker deep under the mountains of Earth, surrounded by quantum computers and advanced AI systems. Her job was to turn the hegemony's own technology against them. She had been studying captured hegemony equipment for months. Now she unleashed a virus that did something impossible. It made hegemony. Ships refused to fire on anything. The virus spread through their military networks like wildfire. Suddenly, hegemony warships found their weapon systems shutting down whenever they targeted human vessels. Their own computers had turned against them. "How is this possible?" Thokrian demanded as his technicians worked frantically to fix the problem. His chief engineer, a spider-like being named Clock, was nearly in tears. "The virus is using our own security protocols against us. It convinces the ship's computer that firing weapons would be an act of self-destruction. Then disconnect the computers." "Sir, without the computers, our ships can't navigate, communicate, or maintain life support. We'd be flying blind and suffocating." The hegemony had built their entire military around advanced computer systems. Now those systems were useless, turned into prison cells by human ingenuity. But the humans weren't done. Commander Ko was in charge of psychological warfare, and she understood something important about the hegemony. They were bullies, and bullies only respected strength. Ko's broadcasts weren't just propaganda, they were education. She showed the hegemony population's footage of every atrocity their leaders had committed over the past century. Slave camps on remote worlds, genocide of peaceful species, the systematic destruction of anyone who opposed them. Your leaders told you the crystal singers were dangerous, Ko's voice said over the images. These are the dangerous ones. Children learning to read, farmers growing food, artists creating beauty. This is what your war commander feared so much that he ordered their murder. The effect was devastating. Hegemony citizens began to understand that their leaders weren't protecting them. They were making them complicit in atrocities. On Thokrian's homeworld of Zircon, massive demonstrations demanded his removal from command. When he ordered troops to stop the protests, half of them refused. The other half joined the demonstrators. General An commanded the human ground forces, but her mission was different from traditional conquest. She wasn't trying to occupy territory. She was trying to eliminate the hegemony's ability to wage war ever again. Her forces struck with surgical precision at hegemony military academies, weapons factories, and research facilities. But they did something unprecedented. They broadcast warnings first, giving civilians time to evacuate. "This is General An of the Human Liberation Force," her messages said. "In 1 hour, we will destroy the military facility at coordinates XYZ. All civilian personnel should leave the area immediately. We have no quarrel with innocent beings." The warnings confused hegemony military commanders. No army in galactic history had warned their enemies before attacking. It seemed like madness, but it was psychological warfare at its finest. The hegemony had portrayed humans as violent savages who would kill anyone. Instead, humans were showing more concern for hegemony civilians than the hegemony government did. When War Commander Thokrian finally realized how badly things were going, he tried to negotiate. He sent a message to Fleet Admiral Moon, requesting a ceasefire to discuss terms. Moon's reply was broadcast across the galaxy. "War Commander Thokrian, you murdered children to send humanity a message. You wanted us to learn about consequences. We learned. Now you will learn. There will be no negotiation, no ceasefire, no mercy. You crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." The message continued with footage of human forces systematically dismantling hegemony infrastructure, not through random destruction, but through careful, methodical elimination of everything that made the hegemony a threat. Your military academies are gone. Your weapons factories are destroyed. Your fleets are disabled or captured. Your leaders are being arrested by their own people. You wanted to teach us about power. We are teaching you about justice. Within 6 months, the 4 species that made up the hegemony were begging for mercy, but humanity's definition of mercy was different from what they expected. The leaders who had ordered the attack on New California faced trial for war crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, broadcast across the galaxy for everyone to see. They were found guilty by judges from dozens of different species. But the hegemony worlds themselves were not destroyed. Instead, they were rebuilt. Human engineers worked alongside reformed hegemony citizens to create new governments based on peace and cooperation instead of conquest and fear. Captain Ryu, who had seen the Crystal Gardens burning, now oversaw the reconstruction of a former hegemony fortress. World. Instead of weapons, they built schools. Instead of military bases, they built hospitals. "Why are you helping us?" asked a young hegemony soldier who had surrendered without fighting. "We would have killed you all." Ryu looked at the alien, remembering her anger and her thirst for revenge. "Because somebody has to break the cycle. Your leaders taught you that strength means hurting others. We're going to teach you that real strength means protecting others. The transformation wasn't easy. Many hegemony citizens couldn't understand why their conquerors were helping them instead of enslaving them. Some tried to restart the old ways, organizing resistance movements against human occupation, but those movements found little support. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had won a war not by being more brutal than their enemies, but by being more humane. Other species across the galaxy watched in amazement and fear. Humanity had dismantled the most powerful military alliance in known space in less than a year. They had done it not through superior numbers or better weapons, but through superior tactics, technology, and most frightening of all, moral conviction. The message was clear to everyone in the galaxy. Humanity would go to any length, make any sacrifice, use any method necessary to protect their friends. But they would do it without becoming monsters themselves. War Commander Thokrian, now a prisoner awaiting trial, was interviewed by a galactic news service. 18 months after the last hegemony world surrendered, Ambassador Yang walked through the halls of the rebuilt Galactic Council station. The old Unity Point had been destroyed in the final battles of the war. This new station, called Harmony Point, was different in every way. The architecture was softer, with curved walls and natural lighting. Gardens from dozens of worlds grew in open spaces where armed guards used to stand. Most importantly, the council chambers had been redesigned. Instead of species sitting in separate sections, the seating was mixed, encouraging cooperation instead of division. Yang represented humanity in the reformed Galactic Council, but she wasn't the only human present. Captain Lee, now Governor Lee of New California, had been elected as the Council's Secretary General by unanimous vote. It was the first time in galactic history that any single species had been trusted with such authority. "The changes are remarkable," said Ambassador Vexti of the Zalani Republic. The Zalani had been neutral during the war, but they had watched humanity's methods with growing respect. A year ago, half the galaxy feared humans. Now they seek your protection. Yang nodded as she looked around the busy corridors. Representatives from over 60 species filled the halls, twice as many as before the war. The difference was that most of these new members were former client states of the hegemony, finally free to govern themselves. "Fear was never our goal," Yang replied. "We just wanted our friends to be safe." The morning session was called to order by Secretary General Lee. He stood at the central podium, looking out at the assembled representatives. 2 years ago, he had been a simple ship captain rescuing refugees. Now he helped govern a galaxy. "Today, we consider the application for membership from the Kethran Collective," Lee announced. "They have completed the reforms required under the new Galactic Charter." The Kethran had been one of the 4 founding species of the hegemony. Their application for council membership had been controversial. Many species wanted them punished forever for their past crimes. Ambassador Thekran of the Kethran stood to address the council. He was an old warrior who had fought against humanity during the war. Now he spoke with the humility of the defeated. "Honorable representatives," he began, "my people committed terrible crimes under the hegemony. We enslaved peaceful species. We destroyed worlds that would not submit. We murdered children to make a point." The chamber was completely silent. Even the translators seemed to pause. "We do not ask for forgiveness," Thekran continued. "We cannot undo the past, but we can build a better future. Under human guidance, we have disbanded our military, freed our slaves, and rebuilt our government around the principle of service to others instead of dominance over them." Elder Threndi, now the representative of the Valani people, stood to respond. He was one of the few survivors of the New California massacre, his crystal skin still bearing scars from that terrible day. "The Kethran were among those who ordered the death of my people," he said, his voice carrying the weight of profound loss. "My children, my students, my friends died because of their hatred." The chamber held its breath. This was the moment that would define the new galaxy. Could the victims forgive their oppressors? "But I have learned something from our human friends," Threndi continued. "Hatred only breeds more hatred. If we want peace, we must be willing to give those who wronged us a chance to become better. The Kethran have proven they can change. I support their application. The vote was close, but the Kethran were admitted to the council. It was a decision that would have been impossible under the old system, where grudges lasted centuries and revenge was considered justice. After the session, Yang walked through the memorial garden that had been built at the heart of the station. It honored all the victims of the hegemony's crimes, not just the Volani who died at New California. Each victim was represented by a crystal flower grown from Volani biotechnology. The flowers were beautiful, but they also served a practical purpose. They purified the station's air and provided healing frequencies that helped all species recover from trauma. Dr. Kim, now the director of Galactic Health Services, was tending to some of the newer flowers. She had spent the past year traveling to former hegemony worlds, helping treat the psychological wounds left by decades of oppression. "How are the Zexcaran refugees adjusting?" Yang asked. The Zexcarans had been enslaved by the hegemony for over a century. "Better than expected," Kim replied, carefully adjusting the light frequency for a cluster of blue flowers. "It takes time to unlearn fear, but they're starting to believe they're really free. And their former masters?" Kim's expression grew thoughtful. "Many of the Tokhari are genuinely trying to make amends. They volunteered to help rebuild the worlds they destroyed. It's complicated, but it's progress. The transformation of the galaxy hadn't been easy. Some species had resisted the changes, clinging to old hatreds and the familiar patterns of dominance and submission. But humanity's approach had been patient and persistent. Instead of imposing their will by force, humans had led by example. They shared their technology freely, helped rebuild destroyed worlds, and most importantly, they kept their promises. When humanity said they would protect someone, they meant it absolutely. Captain Park, who had once commanded cargo ships through dangerous hegemony inspections, now led the Galactic Rescue Service. Her fleet of ships responded to emergencies across the galaxy, from natural disasters to pirate attacks. "We got a distress call from the Outer Rim," she reported to the Council's emergency session. "A plague has broken out on Fairtalk 7. The local government doesn't have the resources to handle it." In the old days, such a crisis might have been ignored or exploited for political advantage, but Secretary General Lee's response was immediate. "Deploy medical teams from the nearest bases. Contact Dr. Kim's office for specialist support, and send agricultural experts. If there's a plague, there might be food shortages too." "Sir," said Representative Mokhtar of the Fairtalk, "my government cannot afford to pay for such assistance." Lee looked at him with surprise. "Who said anything about payment? People are sick. We help sick people. That's what civilized species do." The concept of free aid was still new to many species. Under the hegemony system, everything had a price, usually paid in resources, territory, or subjugation. The idea that powerful species would help weaker ones without demanding payment seemed impossible. But humans had been doing it for 2 years now, and the results spoke for themselves. Engineer Cho, now the head of the Galactic Technology Sharing Initiative, reviewed the latest reports from participating worlds. The combination of human industry, Volani crystal technology, and innovations from dozens of other species had created breakthroughs that benefited everyone. "Faster-than-light travel is now 60% more efficient," she reported to President Lim during their monthly briefing. "Medical technology has advanced more in the past 2 years than in the previous century. And most importantly, food production is up on every participating world." Lim smiled as he looked at the data. "Any world still refusing to participate?" "Fewer every month," Cho replied. "It's hard to argue with success." Even the most stubborn species are starting to realize that cooperation beats conquest. The transformation was most visible on New California itself. The colony had been rebuilt, but it was no longer just a human settlement with Volani refugees. It had become a model for the entire galaxy. Governor Lee stood in the central square, watching children of a dozen different species play together in the crystal gardens. The gardens were more beautiful than ever, tended by both Volani crystal singers and human botanists working together. Colonel Wan, now General Wan, approached with the day's security report. "All quiet, sir. 3 more species have requested permission to establish settlements here. Any problems with integration?" One shook his head. "The opposite, actually. The species seem to get along better here than on their homeworlds. I think it's because everyone knows they're safe. When you're not worried about being attacked, it's easier to be friends." That evening, Lee attended the weekly memorial service for the victims of the massacre. It was held in the rebuilt Crystal Cathedral, where Elder Threndy led the ceremony. The service wasn't about hatred or revenge. It was about remembering those who died and promising that their sacrifice would not be in vain. Representatives from species across the galaxy attended, including many from the former hegemony worlds. "We gather to honor those who died," Threndy sang in the beautiful harmonic language of the Volani. "But we also gather to celebrate those who live. From great tragedy came great change. From death came new life. From hatred came understanding." After the service, Lee walked through the memorial park with Ambassador Yang, who had come to New California for the anniversary. They paused at the central monument, a crystal tree that grew taller every year, fed by the light of the systems. 3 suns. "Do you think it will last?" Yang asked. "This peace we've built?" Lee considered the question carefully. Around them, beings from across the galaxy walked together in harmony. Former enemies helped each other. Children who had never known war played in gardens that grew from the ashes of tragedy. "I think we've changed something fundamental," he said finally. "We've shown the galaxy that strength doesn't